I was 3 days away from submitting my master's thesis in environmental science when my father Harold exploded in our kitchen. "Your future? That's a joke," he screamed, his face twisted with rage I had never seen before. Before I could react, he grabbed my laptop from the counter and smashed it directly onto my head. The sharp corner cut through my scalp as the screen shattered against my skull. "You don't deserve a future. You're just a leech," he shouted while I staggered backward, blood trickling down my forehead. My mother Sandra stood in the doorway, watching this violence unfold, and instead of helping me, she laughed coldly. 25 and still living off us," she added with cruel satisfaction. Blood dripped onto my destroyed thesis as I stared in complete shock, unable to process what had just happened. My parents stormed out, leaving me standing there with my shattered dreams and broken technology, my entire future scattered in pieces across the kitchen floor. I stumbled to the bathroom, my hands shaking as I turned on the faucet and watched pink water swirl down the drain. In the mirror, I could see the gash above my right temple, deeper than I had initially thought, with bits of plastic from the laptop screen embedded in my hair. My reflection looked like someone I didn't recognize, someone who had been completely broken down by the people who were supposed to love her most. After cleaning the wound as best I could, I rushed back to my bedroom, desperately hoping I could salvage something from this disaster. My backup USB drives were always kept in the top drawer of my desk, carefully labeled and organized. When I yanked the drawer open, my heart sank completely. Both drives had been snapped in half, the metal connectors bent and twisted beyond repair. Someone had deliberately destroyed them. Panic set in as I realized my cloud storage was tied to the family account that my father controlled. When I tried to log in from my phone, every password had been changed. 2 years of research on wetland restoration, countless hours of fieldwork documenting pollution sources, interviews with environmental scientists, and detailed analysis of soil samples, everything was gone. I called Dr. Martinez, my thesis advisor, with trembling fingers. His voice was sympathetic but firm when I explained what had happened. "Janis, I understand this is a terrible situation, but the university deadline is absolute. The review committee meets Friday morning, and if your thesis isn't submitted by then, you'll have to wait another full semester to graduate." The reality hit me like another blow to the head. Waiting another semester meant losing my graduate assistantship, which would end in May. Without that income, I couldn't afford to stay in school. I would have to find a job, probably something completely unrelated to my field, and my dream of becoming an environmental scientist would die, along with my destroyed research. I went back downstairs to look for my physical research notes, hoping against hope that I could find something to work with. In the kitchen trash can, I discovered the remnants of my notebook, coffee grounds, and food waste coating every page. My father had clearly been thorough in his destruction. The pages that weren't completely soaked through were illegible. 2 years of handwritten observations and calculations reduced to brown sludge. When my parents returned home an hour later, they acted as if nothing had happened. Harold walked through the kitchen, stepped over the broken pieces of my laptop that still lay scattered on the floor, and calmly announced, "Dinner's at 6. Clean this mess up." Sandra busied herself organizing papers at the dining room table, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like satisfaction. "I'm having the book club over tomorrow evening," she said without looking up. "I don't want any drama or emotional outbursts. Can you handle that, or do we need to make other arrangements?" The casual cruelty of it was almost worse than the violence had been. They were treating me like I was the problem, like I had somehow brought this destruction on myself. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask why they would destroy something I had worked so hard to build. Instead, I found myself nodding and mumbling an apology. As I swept up the broken plastic and metal fragments, I did the math in my head. I had 68 hours to recreate 2 years of work with no computer, no notes, and no access to the university lab data that I needed to complete my analysis. The research I had conducted required specialized equipment to measure soil contamination levels, and that equipment was only available through the university lab during specific hours. My phone buzzed with a text from my research partner from undergraduate work, Marcus, who had seen my social media post about the family emergency that was threatening my graduation. His response made my blood run cold. "Sorry to hear about your troubles. By the way, my article about wetland contamination in the Tri-County area just got accepted for publication in Environmental Science Quarterly. Thanks for the inspiration from our old conversations." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the full implications sank in. Marcus had taken my preliminary findings from 3 years ago, the early research that had formed the foundation of my thesis, and published it under his own name. Not only had my family destroyed my current work, but someone I had trusted had stolen my original ideas. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my parents' television shows playing downstairs as if this was just another normal evening in their lives. The cut on my head throbbed with each heartbeat, and I could feel dried blood pulling at my hair every time I moved. I had less than 3 days to rebuild everything, and I was starting to realize that the obstacles I faced might be completely impossible to overcome. The worst part was the growing suspicion that this wasn't random. My father's rage had been too focused, too deliberate. He hadn't just lost his temper. He had systematically destroyed everything I needed to succeed. And my mother's laughter, that cold amusement as she watched her daughter's future crumble, suggested that this had been planned. As I drifted off to an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important about why this had happened. My parents had always been critical of my academic pursuits, calling them impractical and expensive. But this level of sabotage seemed extreme even for them. There had to be more to this story. Some deeper reason why they wanted me to fail so badly that they would resort to violence to ensure it happened. I woke up before dawn, my head still pounding from the injury and my mind racing with desperate plans. The public library opened at 7 a.m., and I decided that would be my starting point. If I could get access to a computer and the internet, maybe I could begin rebuilding some of my research from online sources. The walk to the library took 45 minutes in the November cold, and I spent the entire time replaying yesterday's events, trying to make sense of what had happened. By the time I arrived, my ears were numb and my fingers ached from the cold, but I was first in line when the doors opened. My optimism lasted exactly 10 minutes. When I approached the reference desk to ask about computer access, the librarian explained that I needed a valid library card to use the terminals for more than 15 minutes. To get a library card, I needed proof of local residency, a utility bill or lease agreement with my name and address. The problem was that I had never established independent residency in this town. When I moved back home 6 months ago after losing my apartment, all my mail still went to my parents' house, and all the utility bills were in their names. I was, legally speaking, just a temporary resident with no official standing. "You can use the guest terminals for 15 minutes at a time," the librarian explained sympathetically. "But there's usually a waiting list, and you'll have to sign up again each time your session expires." I spent the next 4 hours rotating between 15-minute computer sessions, trying to access my university email and student portal. During my 3rd session, I discovered that my account had been suspended due to suspicious activity. According to the automated message, someone had been trying to log in from multiple locations using incorrect passwords, triggering the security protocols. The university IT department wouldn't be open until Monday, which was after the thesis deadline. I was completely locked out of my own academic life. During my lunch break from the computer sessions, I called Marcus back, hoping he might have some advice or assistance. What I learned instead made me feel sick to my stomach. "Oh, Janis, I'm so glad you called," he said, his voice full of false sympathy. "I've been meaning to reach out. I know we worked together on some preliminary research back in our senior year, and I wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any confusion about intellectual property when my article comes out." "Confusion? About what?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand exactly where this conversation was heading. "Well, You know how collaborative research works. Ideas build on each other. And it's not always clear where one person's contribution ends and another's begins. I've been working on this wetland contamination project for over a year now, using my own funding and my own lab access. I just want to make sure we're on the same page about attribution. The casual theft was breathtaking. Marcus was essentially telling me that he had taken my research, developed it further, and was now claiming it as entirely his own work. The preliminary data I had shared with him during our senior project had been the foundation for my entire thesis, and now he was arguing that those ideas had somehow belonged to him all along. I walked back to my parents' house in a daze, feeling like the entire world was conspiring against me. The November afternoon was gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. Dead leaves crunched under my feet, and I found myself thinking that they were probably the only things in worse condition than my academic career. When I got home, I was so exhausted and defeated that I didn't even try to be quiet as I climbed the stairs. I just wanted to collapse in my room and figure out how to tell Dr. Martinez that I wouldn't be graduating this semester after all. But as I passed my parents' bedroom, I heard my father's voice on the phone, and something in his tone made me stop and listen. "Robert, I'm telling you, it's working perfectly," Harold was saying. "She's completely falling apart, just like you said she would." Uncle Robert, my father's older brother, who had always been the successful one in the family. He owned a chain of auto dealerships and had made some smart real estate investments that left him wealthy enough to retire in his 50s. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, mainly because he had never shown much interest in my academic pursuits. "The laptop thing was brilliant," Harold continued. "I made sure to destroy everything she had stored locally, and Sandra took care of changing all the account passwords yesterday morning. There's no way she can recover from this in time." My blood turned cold as I realized what I was hearing. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst of anger. This was a planned attack on my future, coordinated with my uncle, for reasons I couldn't understand. 50,000, right, Harold was saying. "And all we have to do is document that she's incompetent and irresponsible? Robert, after this week, we'll have plenty of evidence that she can't handle basic adult responsibilities." I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear every word. "The old woman's been asking for her again," Harold continued. "Sandra told her that Janis was too busy with school to visit, but we can't keep that up forever. If she changes that will before she kicks the bucket, we're all screwed, grandmother." They were talking about my grandmother Rose, my father's mother, who had been in a nursing home for the past 6 months. I had been trying to visit her regularly, but every time I called the facility, they told me she was sleeping or having medical treatments. My parents always said they would pass along my messages, but apparently she had been asking for me directly. 2 million, Harold was saying now. That's what the farm and mineral rights are worth, minimum. Maybe more if that fracking company follows through with their offer. But she's got some crazy idea that Janis should inherit everything because she's the only grandchild who ever showed interest in environmental issues. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. My grandmother's farm in rural Kentucky included land that had been in our family for 4 generations. I had spent summers there as a child, learning about sustainable farming and developing the love of environmental science that had shaped my entire career. Grandmother Rose had always been proud of my academic achievements and had mentioned several times that she wanted to leave the farm to someone who would protect it from development. "Sandra's been handling the nursing home communications," Harold continued. "As far as the old lady knows, Janis has been too busy with her fancy education to bother visiting. We've been building a case that she's selfish and only cares about herself." My mother's voice joined the conversation, apparently on speakerphone. "The timing couldn't be better," Sandra was saying. "With this thesis disaster, we can show that she's not responsible enough to manage an estate, failed academic, living at home, can't even handle basic school requirements. Robert, your lawyer friend will have no trouble convincing a judge that she's not suitable to inherit. Plus," Harold added with satisfaction, "after this week, she'll probably have some kind of breakdown. Maybe need some professional help. That kind of mental health history would definitely support our case. They were laughing now, actually laughing about their plan to steal my inheritance and destroy my relationship with my grandmother. Everything that had seemed like random bad luck, the problems with my email, the difficulties getting information from professors, the missed scholarship deadlines, suddenly made sense. My parents had been sabotaging me systematically, creating a paper trail of failure and irresponsibility. The best part, Sandra was saying, is that she has no idea. She thinks we're just disappointed in her for not getting her life together. She's been apologizing to us for being such a burden. I backed away from the door, my mind reeling. My parents hadn't just destroyed my thesis in a moment of anger. They had been orchestrating my failure for months, possibly longer. Every setback, every missed opportunity, every piece of bad luck had been carefully engineered to make me look incompetent. And my grandmother, who had always been my biggest supporter, thought I had abandoned her when she needed me most. I made it to my room and closed the door before the full emotional impact hit me. I wasn't just losing my academic career. I was losing my family, my inheritance, and my relationship with the one person who had always believed in me. The people I had trusted most in the world had been working systematically to destroy everything I cared about. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, something began to shift inside me. The despair and self-doubt that had been consuming me started to transform into something harder and more focused. If my parents wanted to play games with my future, they were about to learn that their daughter was much stronger than they had anticipated. For the first time since yesterday's attack, I wasn't thinking about how to salvage my thesis. I was thinking about how to fight back. Sitting in my dark bedroom, I forced myself to think strategically instead of emotionally. My parents had spent months planning this attack on my future, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed I would be passive and defeated. Instead, their betrayal had awakened something fierce inside me that I didn't even know existed. I needed help, and I needed access to resources that my parents couldn't control or sabotage. The solution came to me around 10 p.m. when I remembered Casey, my best friend from high school who had stayed in town after graduation. Casey worked night security at the university, which meant she had access to buildings and computer systems that would normally be locked down during evening hours. I hadn't spoken to Casey in months, mainly because I had been so focused on my research and thesis work. But we had maintained a casual friendship through social media, and I knew she was someone I could trust. More importantly, she was someone my parents had never paid attention to and wouldn't think to monitor. I waited until midnight before sneaking out of the house, taking only my phone and wallet. The 4-mile walk to campus in the November cold gave me time to think through exactly what I needed to accomplish. If I could access the university's computer system, I might be able to recover some of my research from the servers and at least begin rebuilding my thesis. The campus was eerily quiet at 12:30 a.m., with only a few security lights illuminating the pathways between buildings. I found Casey making her rounds near the science building, and the shock on her face when she saw me was immediately followed by concern. "Janis, what happened to your head?" she asked, pointing to the bandage I had put over the cut. I gave her a condensed version of the laptop incident, leaving out the part about the inheritance conspiracy for now. Casey's expression grew increasingly angry as I described my father's violence and my mother's cruel laughter. "That's completely insane," she said when I finished. "Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" "I need computer access," I told her. "Casey, my entire thesis is destroyed, and the deadline is Friday morning. If I can't get into the lab computers, my academic career is over." Casey looked around nervously. "Janis, I could lose my job for this. Security protocols are really strict, and if anyone finds out I let unauthorized personnel into the buildings, please," I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. "I don't have anywhere else to turn. My parents have sabotaged everything else." Something in my tone must have convinced her, because Casey's expression softened. "Okay," she said. But we have to be careful, and if anyone asks, you were never here." The computer lab in the science building felt like a sanctuary after the nightmare of the past 2 days. Casey used her security card to disable the alarms, and within minutes, I was logged into the university network using Casey's guest access credentials. What I discovered made my heart race with hope for the first time in 24 hours. The university's automatic backup system had been saving copies of my work to the network servers every time I logged in from campus. While my local files were destroyed, months of research were still accessible through the centralized system. But as I dug deeper into the files, I found evidence of sabotage that made my blood run cold. Someone had been using my university login credentials to delete crucial data files. The deletion timestamps showed that this had been happening over the past 2 weeks, always during hours when I wasn't on campus. "Casey, look at this," I said, pointing to the screen. "Someone else has been accessing my account and systematically destroying my research. They've been doing it gradually so I wouldn't notice until it was too late." Casey leaned over my shoulder to examine the server logs. "This is crazy, Janis. Who would even know your login information?" I thought about my father's phone call with Uncle Robert, his casual mention of planning and coordination. My parents have been watching me work. They've seen me type my passwords dozens of times. My father could have easily memorized my credentials. But how would he get physical access to the university systems? Before I could answer, Casey's radio crackled to life. "Casey, this is Maria in the administration building. Are you near the science complex?" "Yeah, I'm here. What's going on?" "I've got something weird on the security cameras. Can you meet me at the admin building when you get a chance? There's footage you need to see." Casey and I exchanged looks. "That's my girlfriend," Casey explained. "She works night cleaning in the administration building. If she's found something on the security cameras, it might be related to what's been happening to you." We locked up the computer lab and walked across campus to meet Maria, who was waiting for us in the security office with a concerned expression. Maria was a petite woman with short black hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Casey told me you've been having problems with someone sabotaging your academic work," Maria said to me. "I think I know who's been doing it." She pulled up security footage from 3 weeks earlier, showing the main entrance to the science building. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night, my father appeared on screen, carrying what looked like bolt cutters. He spent several minutes working on the lock of a side entrance before disappearing inside the building. "I've been seeing this guy randomly for weeks," Maria explained. "Always late at night, always with tools. I thought he was maintenance. But when I checked with the facilities department, they had no record of any scheduled work during those hours." More footage showed Harold inside the building, moving through hallways with obvious familiarity. He knew exactly where he was going, heading straight for the environmental science lab where I conducted most of my research. "Has been cutting cables," Casey realized, pointing to the screen. "Look, he's systematically damaging the equipment you need for your soil analysis." The final piece of footage was the most damning. It showed my mother Sandra entering the administration building during normal business hours, approaching the department secretary with a friendly smile. According to the timestamp, this had happened just 2 days after I had submitted my thesis proposal. "Your mom has been here multiple times," Maria said. "She always talks to the secretary for about 15 minutes, and she always brings gifts, coffee, pastries, that kind of thing." The picture was becoming clearer. My parents hadn't just been sabotaging my current work. They had been systematically undermining my academic progress for months, possibly longer. They had been bribing university staff, destroying equipment, and manipulating communication to ensure that I would fail. My girlfriend Louise works in IT support for the university, has been tracking some weird patterns in the computer systems, suspicious login activity, and unauthorized data access. When Casey told me what was happening to you, I asked Louise to take a closer look. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. "He should be here in a few minutes. Louise has been documenting cybersecurity issues that might be related to your situation." While we waited, Casey and I continued reviewing the security footage, What we found was a months-long campaign of sabotage that had been carefully designed to look like accidents and random bad luck. Equipment failures, missing messages, communication breakdowns. All of it had been deliberately engineered by my parents working with corrupt university staff. When Luis arrived, he was carrying a laptop and wearing the intense expression of someone who had been tracking a complex puzzle. He was a thin young man with glasses and the kind of focused energy that suggested he lived and breathed computer systems. "This is bigger than personal sabotage," he said without preamble. "Janis, your situation is part of a much larger pattern of academic fraud that's been affecting dozens of students." He opened his laptop and showed us spreadsheets full of data that meant nothing to me but clearly meant everything to him. The department secretary has been taking money to manipulate student records, change grades, alter transcripts, and disrupt academic progress. Your parents aren't the only ones paying for sabotage. This is an organized operation. The scope of what he was describing was staggering. According to Luis, the corruption had been affecting students' financial aid, scholarship applications, graduate school recommendations, and academic standings for at least 3 years. "The secretary has been very careful," Luis continued. "She only targets students who don't have strong family support or who are already struggling academically. Students who are unlikely to make a fuss or who might not be believed if they complained about mysterious academic problems." "How did you figure this out?" Casey asked. "I've been tracking unusual network access patterns and database modifications that don't match normal administrative workflows," Luis explained. "When you put all the data together, it shows systematic manipulation of student records that corresponds with external payments to university staff. I felt like I was stepping into a completely different world, one where academic corruption was an organized business operation rather than isolated incidents of misconduct. My personal family crisis was actually part of a larger criminal enterprise." "The question is," Luis said, looking directly at me, "what do you want to do about it? I have evidence that could shut down this entire operation, but exposing it would mean going up against people who have been very careful to cover their tracks. They're not going to give up without a fight." Casey, Maria, and Luis were all looking at me, waiting for my decision. 24 hours ago, I had been a graduate student worried about finishing my thesis on time. Now I was being asked to help expose academic fraud that could affect the futures of dozens of students. But as I thought about my grandmother sitting in a nursing home, believing that her granddaughter had abandoned her, and about all the other students who had been victimized by this corruption, the choice became clear. "I want to fight back," I said. "But I'm going to need all the help I can get." Working with Casey, Maria, and Luis felt like joining a resistance movement against an enemy I was only beginning to understand. We spent the rest of the night in the computer lab, mapping out the full scope of the conspiracy that had destroyed my academic progress and threatened my future. Luis was particularly valuable because he had been tracking the corruption from a technical perspective, documenting patterns of unauthorized database access and suspicious financial transactions. What he showed me was far more sophisticated than simple bribery and sabotage. "Look at this," Luis said, pulling up banking records that he had obtained through methods I decided not to ask about too closely. "The payments to university staff aren't just coming from parents who want to sabotage their own children. There are corporate accounts involved, business entities that have been paying for specific types of academic manipulation." He pointed to a series of transactions that had been flowing to the department secretary's personal accounts over the past 18 months. Some of the payments were clearly from individuals like my parents and Uncle Robert, but others were coming from companies I recognized as major local employers. "Creston Industries," I said, reading one of the company names. "They're the largest manufacturing operation in the Tri-County area. Why would they be paying to manipulate university records?" "That's what we need to figure out," Luis replied. "But I think it has something to do with your specific research focus." As Luis worked to recover my deleted files using advanced forensic techniques, a disturbing picture began to emerge. My thesis research on wetland contamination wasn't just academically significant. It was documenting environmental damage that could expose corporate crimes and result in massive financial liability. The soil samples I had collected over the past 2 years showed evidence of industrial dumping that violated multiple federal environmental protection laws. The contamination patterns I had mapped indicated systematic pollution that had been going on for decades, affecting groundwater supplies for 3 counties. Janis, this research is explosive, Maria said, reading over the recovered data. If this information became public, it could trigger federal investigations and environmental lawsuits worth millions of dollars. Casey was examining the geographic data I had collected, comparing it to maps of industrial facilities in the region. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to the screen. "The worst contamination sites are all downstream from Creston Industries' main manufacturing plant." The scope of the environmental damage was worse than I had realized when I was originally collecting the data. Working late at night, with the full university database at my disposal, I was able to cross-reference my findings with historical environmental impact reports and geological surveys that painted a picture of deliberate corporate negligence spanning multiple decades. "They've been dumping industrial waste directly into the groundwater system," I said, feeling sick as I reviewed the evidence. "The contamination affects drinking water supplies for over 50,000 people." Luis had been working quietly in the background, using his technical skills to recover deleted emails and communications that had been purged from university servers. What he found made the scope of the conspiracy even clearer. "Your thesis advisor, Doctor. Martinez has been trying to protect your research," Luis said. "Look at these emails between him and the university administration. Has been fighting against efforts to shut down your project and reassign you to a different research focus." The email chain showed that Dr. Martinez had been under pressure from university officials to redirect my research away from environmental contamination and toward more theoretical topics that wouldn't have practical implications for local industry. He had been defending my work and my right to pursue meaningful research, but he was facing increasing administrative pressure. "The university gets significant funding from Creston Industries," Luis explained. "They sponsor research grants, fund building construction, and provide job opportunities for graduates. The administration has been trying to avoid any research that might jeopardize that relationship." Casey found additional evidence in the security footage she had access to as part of her job. "Your father has been meeting with Creston Industries executives," she said, showing me video from the university parking lot. "Look at this from 3 weeks ago." The footage showed Harold having an animated conversation with 2 men in expensive suits next to a car with corporate license plates. At one point, one of the men handed Harold an envelope, which he tucked into his jacket pocket before shaking hands and walking away. They've been paying him directly. I realized, this isn't just about inheritance money. My parents are being compensated by the corporation to ensure that my environmental research never sees the light of day. Maria discovered another piece of the puzzle when she found forged documents in the department secretary's office during her cleaning rounds. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet were copies of academic records that had been altered to make it appear that my research methods were flawed and my data was unreliable. "They were building a case to discredit your work," Maria explained. "If anyone questioned why your research was never published, they could point to these fake documents and claim that your findings were academically unsound. The more evidence we uncovered, the more I realized that my personal family crisis was part of a much larger environmental justice issue." Luis had been tracking similar patterns of academic sabotage at other universities in regions where corporate environmental crimes were being documented by student researchers. "This is a systematic effort to suppress environmental research," Luis said. "Companies identify graduate students whose work threatens their operations, and they pay corrupt university officials to ensure that research never gets completed or published." But Luis also had encouraging news. The Environmental Protection Agency has been building a case against several corporations for environmental crimes, he said. "They've been looking for exactly the kind of evidence that your research provides." He showed me correspondence between EPA investigators and university officials, documenting the federal agency's efforts to obtain academic research related to environmental contamination in our region. The EPA had been meeting resistance from university administrators who claimed that relevant research was either incomplete or unreliable. Your thesis could be the smoking gun they need, Luis explained. Instead of just corporate fines and slap-on-the-wrist penalties, your research could support criminal prosecutions and force real environmental cleanup. Casey was looking at the timeline we had constructed of the sabotage campaign against my research. The EPA investigation launches next week, she said. That's why your parents escalated their sabotage efforts. They needed to ensure that your research was destroyed before federal investigators could access it. The pieces of the puzzle were finally fitting together. My thesis wasn't just important for my academic career. It was crucial evidence in a federal investigation of corporate environmental crimes. My parents had been paid to ensure that evidence never reached investigators, and they had been willing to destroy their own daughter's future to protect corporate criminals. But now I had allies who understood the stakes and who had the technical skills to fight back. Luis had already uploaded copies of all my research to secure servers that couldn't be accessed or deleted by corrupt university officials. Casey and Maria had documented the security breaches and administrative corruption that had been undermining academic integrity. The question is timing, Luis said. We have 48 hours before your thesis deadline, and the EPA investigation begins Monday morning. If we coordinate this carefully, we can expose the entire conspiracy while making sure your research gets the attention it deserves. For the first time since my father had smashed my laptop over my head, I felt like I had a real chance not just to save my academic career, but to accomplish something much more important. My research could help protect thousands of people from environmental contamination and hold corporate polluters accountable for their crimes. But I also knew that we were taking on powerful enemies who had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence and corruption to protect their interests. My parents and their corporate allies had spent months planning my destruction, and they weren't going to give up easily. Are you ready for this? Casey asked, looking at me seriously. Once we start fighting back, there's no going back. These people are going to do everything they can to destroy all of us. I thought about my grandmother sitting in that nursing home, believing that I had abandoned her. I thought about all the other students whose academic careers had been sabotaged by corrupt officials. I thought about the families who were drinking contaminated water while corporations covered up their crimes. I'm ready, I said. Let's take them down. I returned home just before dawn, exhausted but energized by the night's discoveries. My head was still pounding from the injury, but my mind was clear and focused in a way it hadn't been since this nightmare began. I had allies now, and I had evidence, and for the first time I felt like I might actually be able to fight back effectively. But as I quietly climbed the stairs to my room, I realized that my absence hadn't gone unnoticed. Harold was waiting for me in the hallway, fully dressed, despite the early hour, his expression suspicious and angry. Where have you been all night? He demanded. I had prepared for this question during my walk home. I couldn't sleep because of my head injury, I said, touching the bandage over my cut. I went to the all-night diner on Maple Street to think about what I'm going to do about my thesis situation. Harold's eyes narrowed as he examined my face for signs of deception. You were gone for over 6 hours. That's a long time to sit in a diner. I needed time to process what happened, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm trying to figure out how to explain to Dr. Martinez that I won't be graduating this semester. Something in Harold's expression shifted, a flicker of satisfaction that he tried to hide. Maybe this is for the best, he said. You've been putting too much pressure on yourself with this academic stuff. Sometimes life has a way of redirecting us toward more practical paths. The casual cruelty of his comment, delivered while looking at the injury he had inflicted, made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to nod agreeably, as if I was accepting his twisted logic. You're probably right, I said. I should focus on finding a job and moving out, so I'm not such a burden on you and Mom. Harold's satisfaction was unmistakable now. That's a mature attitude, Janis. Your mother and I have been worried about your ability to handle adult responsibilities, but this shows real growth. I wanted to scream at the hypocrisy of him lecturing me about adult responsibilities while he was actively sabotaging my future for money. Instead, I mumbled something about needing to rest and escape to my room, but my relief was short-lived. Within an hour, I could hear my parents moving around the house, and their conversation was loud enough to carry through my bedroom door. They were discussing my late-night absence with considerable concern. She's never done anything like this before, Sandra was saying. Janis doesn't have friends in town, and she doesn't go to bars or clubs. Where could she have been for 6 hours? I don't like it, Harold replied. She seemed different when she came home, less defeated. We might need to accelerate our timeline. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear every word. Robert's already scheduled to fly in tonight, Sandra said. And Dr. Stevens is prepared to do the evaluation tomorrow morning. But if she's starting to get suspicious, she's not suspicious, Harold said firmly. She's desperate and looking for options. But we can't take any chances. If she somehow manages to salvage her thesis situation, it could complicate everything. Dr. Stevens. I didn't recognize the name, but the context made it clear that they were talking about some kind of psychiatric evaluation. My parents were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, probably as part of their scheme to steal my inheritance. The university deadline is tomorrow, Sandra continued. After that, her academic failure will be a matter of official record, combined with the psychological evaluation showing that she can't handle stress or pressure, we'll have everything Robert's lawyer needs. What about the old lady? Harold asked. She's been asking for Janis again. I told the nursing home that Janis is having a mental health crisis and that family visits are being restricted on medical advice, Sandra replied. Dr. Stevens will be able to provide documentation to support that claim after tomorrow's evaluation. The scope of their planning was breathtaking. They weren't just trying to destroy my academic career. They were systematically isolating me from every source of support and creating a documented pattern of incompetence and mental instability. The timing has to be perfect, Harold was saying. If Janis tries to contact the university or fights the evaluation, we can use that as evidence of paranoia and delusions. Dr. Stevens specializes in these kinds of cases. What about the environmental stuff? Sandra asked. Robert was worried that her research might still cause problems even if she doesn't graduate. That's already been handled. Harold replied with satisfaction. Creston Industries is moving forward with their emergency environmental remediation project starting tonight. By the time any investigators might want to examine those wetland areas, the sites will have been completely cleaned up. Environmental remediation. They were planning to destroy the contaminated areas that my research had documented, eliminating the physical evidence of corporate environmental crimes. Once those sites were cleaned up by the same company that had caused the contamination, there would be no way to prove that any environmental damage had occurred. The timing is crucial, Harold continued. We need to move tonight, before she has a chance to contact anyone or cause any more problems. I realized with growing horror that my parents weren't just planning to have me declared incompetent. They were planning to have me institutionalized immediately. The 72-hour psychiatric hold that Sandra had mentioned yesterday wasn't a threat for the future. It was happening today. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before realizing it was from Casey. Emergency meeting tonight. Louise found something big. Can you get out of the house at 11 p.m.? I stared at the message, torn between hope and terror. Louise had discovered something important, possibly information that could expose the entire conspiracy and save the environmental sites from destruction. But if I left the house again, my parents would definitely become suspicious, and they might accelerate their plans to have me committed. Another text from Casey. This can't wait. Environmental destruction starts at midnight. We have hours, not days. My blood ran cold. Luis had somehow learned about Creston Industries' plan to destroy the contaminated sites tonight. If I didn't act immediately, not only would I lose my academic career and my inheritance, but the environmental crimes that had affected thousands of people would be covered up forever. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs and quickly put my phone away. Harold appeared in my doorway without knocking, his expression more serious than I had seen it since the laptop incident. "Janis, your mother and I are concerned about your mental state," he said. "Last night's behavior was very troubling, and we think you might benefit from professional help." "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I just needed some time to think." "That's exactly the kind of denial we're worried about," Harold replied. "People who are having mental health crises often can't recognize their own symptoms." Sandra appeared behind him, holding what looked like pamphlets or brochures. "We've been reading about stress-induced psychological breaks," she said. "Graduate school pressure, academic failure, living situation stress. It's a perfect storm for mental health problems." They were building their case in real time, creating a narrative of mental instability that would justify whatever they were planning to do to me. Every word they said was being carefully chosen to support their eventual claim that I was incompetent and dangerous. "We've arranged for you to speak with a professional tomorrow morning," Harold announced. "Dr. Stevens specializes in helping young people who are struggling with academic and family pressures." "I don't need to see anyone," I protested. "I just need time to figure out my next steps." "That's not really your decision to make anymore," Sandra said, her voice taking on a cold, authoritative tone. "You're living in our house, and we're responsible for your welfare. If we believe you're a danger to yourself or others, we have the legal right to ensure that you get appropriate help." The threat was unmistakable. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they were prepared to use force. Harold stepped further into my room, and I noticed that Uncle Robert was standing behind them in the hallway. He must have arrived while I was listening to their conversation, which meant they were moving even faster than I had anticipated. "Hello, Janis," Uncle Robert said, his voice filled with false sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear about your difficulties. Your parents called me because they're very worried about your behavior." Robert was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who was used to getting his way through money and influence. Looking at him now, I could see the family resemblance to my father, but where Harold was crude and violent, Robert was smooth and calculating. "I've brought some legal documents that might help clarify the situation," Robert continued, holding up a manila folder. "Sometimes when people are under severe stress, it helps to have clear guidelines about expectations and responsibilities." I realized that the documents probably included guardianship papers or some other legal mechanism to give my parents control over my medical and financial decisions. Once those were signed, they would have complete power over my life, and I would have no way to fight back against their conspiracy. "We'll discuss all of this tomorrow, after you've had a chance to speak with Dr. Stevens," Harold said. "But tonight, we think it would be best if you stayed home and rested. You've been under a lot of stress, and we don't want you to do anything impulsive. They were essentially placing me under house arrest. If I tried to leave, they would use that as evidence of mental instability and call the authorities to have me forcibly committed for psychological evaluation." My phone buzzed again with another message from Casey, and I could see Robert's eyes tracking the sound. "Janis, why don't you give me your phone?" he suggested. "Social media and constant communication can be very stressful when you're dealing with personal problems." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not giving you my phone." The word hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see my parents and uncle exchanging meaningful glances. "That's exactly the kind of paranoid behavior we're concerned about," Sandra said. "Janis, we're trying to help you, and your hostility suggests that you're not thinking clearly." They were building their case with every interaction, turning my normal responses into symptoms of mental illness. If I cooperated, they would say I was passive and incompetent. If I resisted, they would say I was paranoid and delusional. But I had one advantage that they didn't know about. Casey, Maria, and Luis were expecting me tonight, and they had evidence that could expose everything. If I could just get out of the house and meet them, we might be able to stop the environmental destruction and expose the conspiracy before my parents could have me committed. The question was whether I could escape without triggering the immediate psychiatric intervention that they were clearly prepared to implement. As if reading my thoughts, Harold stepped closer to my bed. "Janis, I think it would be best if you came downstairs with us. We can all talk about this together, as a family." I knew that once I left this room, I wouldn't be coming back. They were moving tonight, and my window of opportunity was closing fast. I looked at my father, uncle, and mother standing in my doorway like prison guards, and made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of protesting or trying to argue with them, I nodded submissively. "You're right," I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated and resigned. "I haven't been thinking clearly. Maybe talking to Dr. Stevens tomorrow would help." The relief on their faces was unmistakable. Harold's shoulders relaxed, and Sandra actually smiled. "That's a very mature decision," Uncle Robert said approvingly. "Sometimes the hardest part of getting help is admitting that you need it." "Can I just use the bathroom first?" I asked. "And maybe change clothes before we go downstairs?" "Of course," Sandra replied. "Take your time. Well, wait for you in the living room." As soon as they left, I moved into action with desperate efficiency. I grabbed the phone Casey had given me yesterday, a backup device that my parents didn't know about, and sent a quick text. "House arrest. Need extraction. Emergency." Then I gathered everything I might need. The evidence Luis had printed for me, copies of my research that Casey had helped me recover, and my driver's license and credit cards. Everything went into a small backpack that I could carry easily. The bathroom window was small, but it opened onto the roof of our back porch. It was a drop I had made before as a teenager, when I wanted to sneak out without my parents knowing. Tonight, it might be my only chance to escape before they locked me up. I started the shower running to provide cover noise, then eased the window open as quietly as possible. The November air was shockingly cold against my skin, but I forced myself to move carefully across the icy roof shingles. The jump from the porch roof to the ground was about 8 feet, and I landed hard in the flower bed below. Pain shot through my ankle, but I could walk on it. More importantly, I was outside the house and moving toward the street where Casey was waiting in her car with the engine running. "Drive," I said as I threw myself into the passenger seat. "They're planning to have me committed tonight, and Creston Industries is going to destroy the wetland sites starting at midnight." Casey floored the accelerator, and we sped toward the university where Luis and Maria were waiting with what Casey described as evidence that changes everything. Luis hacked into Creston Industries' internal communications, Casey explained as we drove. "What we found is bigger than environmental cover-up. This is a systematic operation to suppress environmental research across multiple universities in several states." We met Luis and Maria in the computer lab where we had worked the night before, but this time they had additional allies. Tyler, Casey's law student roommate, was there with a laptop and a stack of legal documents. More surprisingly, Dr. Martinez was also present, looking concerned but determined. "Janis, I'm glad you're safe," Dr. Martinez said. "Luis contacted me 3 hours ago with evidence of the conspiracy against your research. I've been fighting administrative pressure to shut down your thesis project, but I never realized the scope of what we were dealing with." Luis had transformed the computer lab into a war room, with multiple screens displaying evidence of corporate corruption, academic fraud, and environmental crimes. What he showed us was staggering in its scope and sophistication. "Creston Industries has been operating this program for over 5 years, Luis explained. They identify graduate students and faculty researchers whose work threatens corporate interests, and they pay corrupt university officials to sabotage that research. The evidence included internal corporate emails discussing specific students and faculty members who had been targeted for sabotage. My name appeared on lists alongside dozens of other researchers whose work had been systematically undermined. But it gets worse, Luis continued. The academic sabotage is just one part of a larger environmental cover-up operation. Creston Industries has been coordinating with similar corporations in other states to hide pollution, suppress research, and eliminate evidence of environmental crimes. Tyler, the law student, had been reviewing the legal implications of what Luis had discovered. This is a federal criminal conspiracy, he said. Environmental crimes, academic fraud, bribery of public officials, witness intimidation. We're looking at potential prison sentences measured in decades. Dr. Martinez was examining my reconstructed research data. Janis, this work is extraordinary, he said. It documents environmental damage that could affect hundreds of thousands of people. This isn't just a thesis. It's crucial evidence for public health and safety. But Maria had discovered the most time-sensitive information. The environmental destruction starts in 2 hours, she reported. Creston Industries has trucks and equipment already positioned at the wetland sites. Once they begin their emergency cleanup operation, the physical evidence will be gone forever. Casey was monitoring police scanners and emergency communications. There's more, she said grimly. I'm picking up radio chatter about a psychiatric emergency at your house. Your parents called the police and reported that you're having a mental breakdown and might be dangerous. The full scope of their plan was becoming clear. While Creston Industries destroyed the environmental evidence, my parents would have me committed for psychiatric evaluation, eliminating the researcher who could testify about what the evidence meant. We have one advantage, Luis said. The EPA investigation launches Monday morning, but I've been in contact with the investigators. If we can get them the evidence tonight, they can intervene before the environmental sites are destroyed. Tyler was already on the phone with federal authorities, using his law school connections to reach EPA investigators and federal prosecutors. I've got someone from the Environmental Protection Agency on the line, he said. They're very interested in what we've discovered. Dr. Martinez was preparing to submit my thesis through an emergency procedure that would create an official academic record of my research before the university deadline. Even if the physical sites are destroyed, your documented research will stand as evidence of what was there, he explained. But Casey was monitoring our communications with growing alarm. They're tracking us, she said. I'm seeing increased security activity around campus, and there are police units being directed to the university. Luis confirmed her fears. Someone's been monitoring our network activity, he said. They know we've accessed their internal communications, and they know we've contacted federal investigators. The stakes were escalating rapidly. We weren't just fighting to save my academic career anymore. We were racing against time to expose a massive criminal conspiracy before the evidence could be destroyed and we could be arrested or discredited. Janis, you have a choice to make, Dr. Martinez said seriously. We can submit a safe version of your thesis that focuses on general environmental science without mentioning specific corporate crimes. That would probably get you your degree and allow you to graduate on schedule. Or, Luis added, we can go public with everything tonight. Upload the evidence to multiple news outlets, submit your complete research to federal investigators, and trust that the truth will protect us from retaliation. Tyler was still on the phone with federal authorities. The EPA investigators want to meet with us immediately, he reported. But they're warning that once we officially cooperate with a federal investigation, could well be targets for intimidation and legal retaliation. Casey was checking her security monitors. We've got vehicles approaching the campus, she said. Multiple cars with government plates. These aren't university security. I looked around the room at the people who had become my allies in this fight. Casey and Maria risking their jobs, Luis using his technical skills to expose corruption, Tyler providing legal expertise, and Dr. Martinez putting his academic career on the line to support my research. My grandmother was still sitting in that nursing home, believing that I had abandoned her. Thousands of people were drinking contaminated water, while corporations covered up their crimes. and my parents were preparing to have me locked up to protect the money they were being paid to ensure my silence. The decision was actually easy. Let's expose everything, I said. Upload the evidence, contact the media, and coordinate with federal investigators. If we're going to fight these people, let's fight them with everything we have. Lewis' fingers flew over his keyboard as he began uploading evidence to secure servers and media outlets. Tyler coordinated with federal investigators who were scrambling to respond to our revelations. Dr. Martinez submitted my complete research through emergency academic channels that would create a permanent official record. As we worked, Casey maintained security watch. Federal agents are entering the building, she reported, but they're not coming to arrest us. They're coming to provide protection. For the first time in 3 days, I felt like we might actually win this fight. The next few hours felt like the climax of an action movie. Except this was my real life, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. By 11 p.m., the computer lab had become a coordination center for what turned out to be one of the largest environmental crime investigations in recent federal history. EPA investigators arrived first, followed by FBI agents specializing in corporate corruption and academic fraud. Agent Sarah Collins, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who led the Environmental Crimes Unit, reviewed Lewis' evidence with growing amazement. Miss Janis, your research provides the missing pieces we've been looking for in our investigation, Agent Collins said. We've been tracking Creston Industries for over a year, but we couldn't prove the systematic nature of their environmental cover-up operations. Dr. Martinez was working with the university president, who had been awakened and brought to campus for an emergency meeting about the academic corruption that had been uncovered. President Wilson looked shocked and furious as he reviewed the evidence of bribery and sabotage involving university staff. The department secretary will be terminated immediately, President Wilson announced, and we're implementing a complete review of all academic records that may have been manipulated over the past 3 years. But the most dramatic development came when Tyler's legal connections resulted in a coordinated law enforcement response that we watched unfold in real time through security cameras and news feeds. At exactly midnight, just as Creston Industries equipment was beginning to move toward the wetland sites, federal agents arrived with court orders stopping the environmental remediation operation. The trucks that were supposed to destroy evidence instead became evidence themselves, loaded with equipment that proved corporate intent to cover up environmental crimes. We've arrested 12 Creston Industries executives, Agent Collins reported, including the CEO and the entire Environmental Compliance Department. The charges range from environmental crimes to bribery of public officials to conspiracy to obstruct federal investigations. Louise had been monitoring corporate communications all night, watching as Creston Industries executives realized their operation was falling apart. They're panicking, he said with satisfaction. Internal emails show they're trying to delete files and destroy evidence, but it's too late. Everything's already been backed up and preserved. Casey's security access allowed us to monitor what was happening at my parents' house. Police had responded to their report of my mental health crisis. But when they discovered that I was voluntarily cooperating with federal investigators, the psychiatric emergency suddenly evaporated. Your father and Uncle Robert are being arrested, Casey reported, watching the live feed from police body cameras. Charges include fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and filing false police reports. Watching Harold being handcuffed and read his rights was surreal. 3 days ago, he had been violently destroying my laptop and calling me a worthless leech. Now he was facing federal charges that could result in decades in prison. Sandra was arrested an hour later when investigators found evidence in her purse of payments from Creston Industries for consultation services that included sabotaging her own daughter's academic career. Dr. Martinez had been working through the night to ensure my thesis met all university requirements despite the emergency circumstances. At 3 a.m., he made the announcement I had been afraid I would never hear. Janis, your thesis has been accepted with the highest possible recommendation, he said. The university is also offering you a full scholarship for doctoral studies, along with a research assistantship that will allow you to continue investigating environmental crimes. But the most emotional moment came when Agent Collins helped me make a phone call to my grandmother's nursing home. When I explained who I was, the night nurse immediately put my grandmother on the phone. "Janis, is that really you?" Grandmother Rose's voice was weak but clear. "I've been so worried. Your parents told me you were too busy to visit, but I knew something was wrong." Through tears, I explained everything that had happened: the sabotage, the conspiracy, the arrest of my parents and uncle. Grandmother Rose listened with growing anger. "I knew Robert was planning something," she said. "He kept calling and asking about my will, wanting to know what I was leaving to whom. But I never imagined Harold would hurt you to steal your inheritance." "Grandma, I'm so sorry I couldn't visit," I said. "They were blocking all my calls and messages." "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart," she replied firmly. "You're the strongest person in this family, and you've proven it by fighting back against them." The next morning brought a media explosion that exceeded everyone's expectations. Samantha Brooks, an investigative journalist who had received Lewis evidence uploads, published a comprehensive exposé that made national headlines. The story of corporate environmental cover-up, academic corruption, and family betrayal captured public attention in a way that transformed my personal crisis into a symbol of environmental justice. Student uncovers massive corporate environmental cover-up after family tries to destroy her research. Read the headline in the Washington Post. Similar stories appeared in the New York Times, Environmental Science Weekly, and dozens of other publications. The university held a press conference where President Wilson publicly apologized for the corruption that had affected my research and announced a comprehensive review of academic integrity policies. "Miss Janis represents the best of what university research should be," he said. "Her courage in exposing this conspiracy demonstrates the importance of protecting academic freedom and environmental science." 6 months later, I graduated with my master's degree with highest honors, and my research had become the foundation for federal prosecutions that resulted in record environmental fines and mandatory cleanup operations. Creston Industries was ordered to pay over $50 million in environmental remediation costs and faced ongoing criminal prosecution for executives who had orchestrated the cover-up. My parents were sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy, while Uncle Robert faced additional charges for financial crimes related to the inheritance scheme. The farm that had been the target of their conspiracy became the centerpiece of an environmental restoration project that I helped design and implement. Casey, Maria, Luis, and Tyler became lifelong friends and professional colleagues. Casey left her security job to become an environmental activist. Maria started law school with a focus on environmental justice. Luis founded a nonprofit organization that uses technology to expose corporate corruption, and Tyler became my legal advisor for the Environmental Justice Foundation I established using my inheritance. Dr. Martinez became my doctoral advisor, and our research partnership transformed the university's environmental science program into a nationally recognized center for environmental justice research. He often tells new students about the night when everything changed, when a graduate student's determination to fight back against injustice led to one of the largest environmental crime prosecutions in federal history. But the most important outcome was personal. Grandmother Rose recovered her health once the stress of the family conspiracy was resolved, and she moved to an assisted living facility near the university where I could visit her regularly. She lived to see my doctoral graduation 3 years later, and she was proudly present when I received the Presidential Award for Environmental Justice Research. "I always knew you were going to change the world," she told me at the award ceremony. "I just didn't realize it would happen because someone tried to destroy your future." The experience taught me that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the greatest victories, but only if you're willing to fight back with everything you have. When people try to make you feel powerless, that's often when you discover that you're stronger than you ever imagined. My story became part of a larger movement of environmental justice advocates who refused to let corporate polluters hide their crimes behind money and influence. The research that my family tried to destroy became the foundation for environmental protections that will benefit thousands of people for generations to come. Looking back, I realized that my father was wrong about my future. It wasn't a joke. It was the beginning of a movement that would hold powerful corporations accountable for their environmental crimes and prove that individual courage can create systematic change. Have you ever had to fight back against people who tried to sabotage your dreams? What would you do if your own family betrayed your trust to protect corporate interests? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for following my journey from victim to environmental justice advocate. If this story inspired you to think about the power of fighting back against injustice, please like this video, subscribe to my channel for more stories about overcoming betrayal and fighting for what's right, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that they're stronger than the people trying to tear them down. Remember, your future is never a joke when you're brave enough to fight for it.